Okay, good morning, everybody. We will start our clinic today. We are starting in the original place where clinic should be held. That is the OPD. Now, please somebody mute your audio because I can hear a feedback. Please mute your audio. I can hear a feedback. Yes, good. That's better. Now, we will have today clinics on inguinal hernia. That is a very common problem. It is almost the bread and butter of the surgeon. And let us start with the first thing. What is the definition of, how do you change this? Changing over here. Yes. What is the definition? Now, a hernia is a protrusion of viscous through a normal or abnormal opening, right? The normal openings, most commonly what everybody refers to as hernia is an inguinal hernia. And the normal opening is through the inguinal canal coming out. Uh, Otherwise, there can be abnormal openings. Abnormal openings, in the example of an incisional hernia, where could somebody please mute all your audio? I can hear a feedback. Please mute your this thing, mics. Everybody mute your mic. Yeah, please. Mute it. Mute everybody's mic. Hello. Now, it could be protrusion of viscous through a normal or abnormal opening, as I mentioned earlier, and it could be either internal or external. Now, what I called was a normal opening was most commonly, which is referred to as the hernia, is the inguinal canal. Yes, somebody has raised their hand. Somebody has a question. You can unmute yourself and then you can unmute yourself and then ask the question. Galaxy M21, yes. Please unmute yourself and ask the question. Okay, I think he's done it by mistake. Anyway, a protrusion of viscous through a normal or abnormal opening, either internal or external. Now, the hernias can be external hernia where it protrudes outside, or it could be an internal hernia where it protrudes within the abdominal cavity itself. Like it could go through the diaphragm where you have the hiatus hernia or the diaphragmatic hernias. It could go through the foramen Winslow, or it could go through a defect in the mesentery. Now, the most common inguinal hernias are either direct or indirect. Direct are the hernias which come out directly through what is called the Hasselbalch triangle, and most commonly the boundaries of the Hasselbalch triangle, which will come later, I will mention to you. Indirect hernia comes out through a more indirect route from the deep ring out through the external ring. अरे पिछले साल अरे अरे आगे नहीं जा रहा यार ये चेंजिंग वो किया ना मैं यार जा नहीं रहा तो वही तो दबा रहा हूँ. Now we will come to the anatomy of the inguinal canal, which is extremely important for understanding of hernia. The floor is formed by the inguinal canal. The anterior wall is formed by the aponeurosis external oblique and lateral third of the conjoint tendon. The roof, the middle third of the conjoint tendon, and the posterior wall is the fascia transversalis. Here we have a diagram where here is the inguinal canal. Now, inguinal canal, the inguinal ligament. Inguinal ligament is formed by the upturned portion of the aponeurosis of the external oblique. The external oblique being the superficial most muscle of the abdominal wall. As it comes down, it forms an aponeurotic portion towards its insertion, and inferiorly it forms the inguinal ligament from the anterior superior iliac spine to the pubic tubercle. Now, this aponeurotic portion turns on itself and gives rise to what is called as the inguinal ligament. There is an opening in this aponeurotic portion which is called the superficial ring, and medially it inserted and forms the rectus sheath. Now, so the entire floor of the inguinal canal is formed by the inguinal ligament. Then you have the posterior wall. Now, posterior wall of the inguinal canal is formed by the fascia transversalis. You have an opening in the fascia transversalis, which is the deep ring, which represents the deep ring. Right. Now, the anterior wall is also, as I mentioned earlier, is formed almost entirely by the aponeurosis of the external oblique, and as I mentioned, there's an opening over here in the aponeurosis, which is the superficial ring. In addition, there's also another structure which is the conjoint tendon. A conjoint tendon is formed by the lowermost fibers of the internal oblique and the transversus abdominis muscle. They arch like this. Now, in the lateral third of the inguinal canal, they form the anterior wall. Then they arch over the cord structures over here and form the roof. And over here, they've inserted into the pubic tubercle where they form the posterior wall. Now, this is very important understanding for the older repairs of the hernia, the Bessini's repair, especially if you are to understand this. Over here is what is the Hasselbalch's triangle, as I told you before. This would be the external iliac artery. As it enters the femoral canal, it becomes a femoral artery, but just before entering, it gives off a superior branch, which goes and inserts into the rectus sheath, and this is the inferior epigastric artery. Now, this forms the lateral boundary of what is called the Hasselbalch's triangle. The medial boundary is formed by the rectus sheath, the lateral wall, the lateral edge of the rectus muscle. The inferior boundary is formed by the inguinal ligament. This area is what is called as the Hasselbalch's triangle. And over here is a superficial ligament through which the cord structures come out, and then they come out through the deep ring. They come out through the superficial ring and into the scrotum, right? So now let us take our hypothetical patient. We'll give him a name of XYZ. The patient, if he's young, let's say by young, maybe he's within 40 years of age, most likely it is an indirect inguinal hernia. It may not be 100% true, but yes, most likely, I mean, if you take all probability, it would be indirect inguinal hernia. If he's older, above 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, the likelihood is it is a direct hernia. Because direct hernia most commonly occurs as a result of the weakening of the abdominal musculature with age. Now, his residence may not be of much significance, so wherever he resides, his occupation. It is said that people involved in manual labor, people involved in manual labor are more prone to having inguinal hernia or weightlifters, but that may not be necessarily the true. Thus, they say that indirect inguinal hernias, 30% of the patients who have a patent processus vaginalis, despite not having a this thing clinically inguinal hernia present. All you do is you have a patent processus vaginalis. The patent processus vaginalis through which the indirect hernia would come through. Now, the chief complaint of this patient would be that he'd have a swelling in the groin, and this may extend into the scrotum since a long period of time. Now, it is important to remember, if it extends into the scrotum, then the likelihood is that it is an indirect hernia. If it's confined only into the groin region, then it is most likely a direct hernia. Direct hernias very rarely go into the scrotum unless they're very massive. The history of the presenting illness, the patient was perfectly well until so many days ago when he noticed a swelling in the inguinal region or he noticed a swelling in the scrotal region. Now, every swelling starts as a small swelling. So initially it was small and it disappears on lying down. Now, disappearing on lying down is supposed to be a characteristic of the direct hernia. Direct hernias are the ones which disappear on lying down, because a direct hernia, normally the opening is extremely large. The opening is not so small. Whereas indirect hernias, because of the obliquity of the opening, they don't reduce so easily. Now, this is also a very characteristic sign of the hernias, because if a swelling demonstrates this change in size. Now, what I tell the students is, when I have a patient who comes to the OPD with complaints of swelling in the inguinal region or in the scrotum, first question I ask him is there a change in the size of the swelling on lying down or standing up, or coughing or straining while defecation, while micturition? Is there a change in size, or is there a change in size when there is a raised in the intra-abdominal pressure? All these activities like coughing, straining, sneezing, micturition, etc. would give rise to a change in size of the, or rather a raised in the intra-abdominal pressure, and therefore a change in the size. Now, initially all these swellings would have been small, gradually increased in size, and gradually the swelling would have extended right down into the scrotum. Now, on general examination, I always tell the students, and they always never do this, is the first sentence in your general examination is, patient is lying down in bed with no obvious distress. And I also emphasize that in the case of surgical patients, all these patients would not be in any obvious distress. If the patient is in obvious distress, then there would be some other pathology. I mean, it could be some other inflammation or obstruction, etc. Now, the pulse, BP, etc., there's no pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, edema, or significant lymph node enlargement. All these are normal. we come to the local examination. Now, the swelling could either be two classical shapes, piriform or oval or spherical. Piriform means it is a pear-shaped, it has a constricted neck and, and a dilated fundal area. Now, this is characteristic of an indirect hernia, because in an indirect hernia, the initial part of the sac has to travel through the inguinal canal and then come out through the superficial ring and then become a dilated swelling. Whereas a direct hernia does not have that sort of restriction. It comes out directly through the posterior wall. The extent is of the extent could be to the inguinal region or to the scrotum or only in the inguinal region. If it extends, as I mentioned earlier, to the scrotum, that means it's most likely an indirect hernia. If it extends only in the inguinal region, you can only see it in the inguinal region, then most likely it is a direct. If you examine it carefully, look at it for some time, you may or may not see peristalsis. The presence of peristalsis would depend on the content. If the content of hernia, it consists of intestine, then you would see peristalsis. If, say, for example, it's omentum, you would not see peristalsis. So, if it is an enterocoel, as what is described, enterocoel, peristalsis would be seen. Omentocoel, peristalsis would not be seen. Now, the skin of the swelling would be, most of the time, it would be normal. But it could be red, or there could be erythema over the skin. Now, this would indicate that there is an inflammation. The contents are inflamed. Now, inflammation could be as a result of either obstruction, strangulation, or there is another kind of hernia which is called inflamed hernia, where the content could be the either Meckel's diverticulum or appendix, which is inflamed. Now, cough impulse is normally present most of the hernias, but sometimes what happens is that long-standing hernias, the deep opening could get blocked, and as a result of which there would be no cough impulse. The position of the penis would be deviated depending on how large the swelling is. Just 1 minute, please. Yes?
In that patient, we are shifted to SICU due to breathlessness, infective etiology on HRCT.
So, where should I sign that? Okay, as I mentioned before, the position of the penis could be deviated to the opposite side. If there's a very large swelling, it would deviate the penis. Otherwise, it would penis could be centrally placed. Now, I've always emphasized that inspection is like inspection, palpation, percussion, auscultation is using your senses. You have the sense of vision. So inspection is using your vision. You don't touch it, you look at it and make some observations. Next is you palpate it. Your observations you made with your vision are confirmed. And most important thing in palpation is the consistency, which inspection would not tell you. All your findings in inspection are confirmed by palpation. Now, you try to get above the swelling. If the swelling, now again, let me add, if the swelling is extending into the scrotum, then you should attempt to get above the swelling. It's very simple. You hold on to the, you feel the scrotum and feel the swelling, whether the swelling can be palpated at the root of the scrotum. Now, if you cannot get above the swelling, now this is to differentiate a purely scrotal swelling like a hydrocele or a testicular tumor with a with a inguinoscrotal swelling, that is a hernia which is starting from the inguinal region extending into the scrotum. So obviously, if it is a purely scrotal swelling, you'd be able to get above the swelling. If it is an inguinoscrotal swelling, you would not be able to get above the swelling. Now, testes could be palpated separately, especially if it is a hernia, because hernial sac will be separate and the testes will be separate. If it's a hydrocele, because the tunica vaginalis surrounds the testes would not be able to be palpated separately in a hydrocele. Now, we come to the most important test which I would like to tell you, and which is the test which I would suggest you do. It is called the ring occlusion test. This is the most elegant test, easiest test to do. And once again, let me tell you that when you are examining a patient with hernia, you would like to know whether it is a direct or an indirect hernia. The earlier points I mentioned that, okay, that the shape, piriform shape, whether it's extending into the scrotum or not, are also important. But there is only one way to know the exact path of the hernia is by the ring occlusion test. Now, how do you do the ring occlusion test? The ring occlusion test is done by pushing back or reducing all the contents of the hernia back inside. That is very important. When you're describing the ring occlusion test, you should say that the hernia should be reduced completely. After reduction, you have to place your thumb, because that is your biggest finger, over the deep ring, over the deep ring, and then ask the patient to cough. If the hernia appears, then it is an indirect hernia. If the hernia does not appear, then it is a direct hernia. Why? Because the direct hernia, let me go back to the earlier slides. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this illustration, as I mentioned over here, that the direct hernia comes out through the Hasselbalch triangle. When you're doing a ring occlusion test, your thumb is placed over here over the deep ring. And if it is an indirect hernia, your thumb should prevent the contents from coming out. However, if it is a direct hernia, your thumb is not occluding the content. So therefore the content would come out. Then we have the finger invagination test. Unfortunately, I had put an illustration for the finger invagination test, but the JR has not uploaded it. I will change to the view. I will show it to you over here. 1 minute. One minute, I'm trying to get the. Okay, I will show it to you later on as soon as my assistants, all of us older people are technologically challenged so that we may not. I wanted to stop the screen sharing and then show you the. Okay, I'll show it to you later. The ring occlusion, or rather the finger invagination test, is very simple. Your finger is introduced into the scrotum and the scrotal skin is pushed inside alongside of the hernia. Then it goes to the root of the scrotum. Because the skin is very loose, it goes into the root of the scrotum and then finally goes into the inguinal canal. And then your finger is placed in the inguinal canal and you ask the patient to cough. If you feel the impulse of your cough on the tip of your finger, then your finger is placed. Now your finger, when you have pushed it along with the scrotal skin and it lies somewhere in this region. Your finger lies somewhere in this region and your finger should be turned towards the abdominal wall. Now when the patient coughs, if you feel the impulse on the tip of your finger, that means the hernial contents are coming and then hitting the tip of your finger. If you feel on the pulp of your finger, that means it's a direct hernia coming directly over there. So I hope all of you understand the function of the finger invagination test. Percussion. You can get a dull or a resonant note depending on the contents. If the contents are omentum, then you get a dull note. If the contents are bowel, which are gas filled, you'd get a resonant note. Auscultation, again, depending on the presence or absence of the bowels in the hernia, you would get you would hear peristaltic sounds or bowel sounds. Okay. Now, I would just show, this is an illustration of the various types of hernias. Now, this is what is called a congenital hernia. In a congenital hernia, what they say is that there is a patent processus vaginalis. So if you see over here, the processes of the tunica vaginalis should have closed and just surrounded the testis. Instead, the tunica vaginalis is opened and it communicates with the peritoneal cavity. And the contents come down right up to the testes. So there is no, and the testes and they lie within the same, like the hernial sac is basically the patent processus vaginalis. So this is a congenital hernia. It is also said that the processus vaginalis is patent in 30% of the population without clinically having a hernia. And later on, maybe as a result of weakness or exertion, etc., the hernia comes. That through that processus vaginalis, the hernia, that's a weakness through which the hernia pops out. Then you have the congenital funicular type, where the processus vaginalis ends just short of the testes. Now, this is the acquired hernia, where as a result of it coming out, it comes here to the superior pole of the scrotum. And this is the infantile type of hernia. The two types of infantile, where this is it's distorting the tunica vaginalis in this particular way. Now, this is what is called as a sliding hernia. In a sliding hernia, this is the ascending colon, the cecum, and the appendix. This is forming one wall. What has happened is, now this is normally a retroperitoneal structure, but it slid down, and it now forms one wall of the hernial sac. Like, in addition, there may be other contents over here. The problem with this is, now these type of hernias are not reducible. So this should be suspected in a large irreducible hernia. This is a Madel's hernia, where you have a W-shaped loop which comes down. And there can be also strangulation over here. This is the W-shaped loop, and this portion may be the tightest, so therefore it giving rise to strangulation. Right. Now, what would the management of hernias be? Management, when the student, even our PG students, are asked the management of any disease, they start saying CBC, this, that, the other. That is not important in this particular case. We are interested, CBC, etc., you will do. That is more to see whether the patient is fit for surgery or not. But more important than that is to establish your diagnosis. Now, being a surgeon, I know very well that this is a hernia. It cannot be anything but a hernia, and it's below my dignity. In very rare instances, do I order any test to confirm my diagnosis that this is a hernia. But yes, a sonography could be done of the inguinal region. Now, sonography would tell you everything you have got clinically. It would tell you that contents are coming from the deep ring, out through superficial ring, into the scrotum. They would tell you the contents are intestine or omentum. They would, so you would then it would confirm that it is a direct or indirect hernia. All the things which you have so far got clinically, you would be confirmed by sonography. So yes, us being a teaching institution, we do a sonography for confirmation, though I don't require that because I'm pretty sure of my diagnosis otherwise. Next comes, so once you've confirmed your diagnosis, then you need to do all your investigations to know whether the patient is fit for surgery or not. So the least investigation anybody could do is a hemoglobin and a urine routine. Hemoglobin would tell you whether the hemoglobin is adequate. Urine routine would tell you also whether there's any urinary tract infection, and plus the urine albumin sugar would also indicate if there's sugar present in the urine, then patient's diabetic status would also be or rather would be sort of this thing ruled out or ruled out. But normally what we do is a CBC, hemoglobin to TLC. If it's raised, then suggestive of some infective process going on, etc. Then we also do a blood urea creatinine to see whether the kidney function is good or not. We do, of course, blood sugar. Sometimes we do LFT, liver function test, especially if you are planning to give the person general anesthesia, because the drugs would be denatured in the liver and the liver function is deranged then. And sometimes they ask for chest X-ray if there's any doubt, patient has a cough or something. They'd also, if the patient has hypertension or any heart disease, then echocardiogram to see the functioning of the heart. So it can go on and on, but all those tests, all these tests are not part of your diagnostic test for the disease. It is part of the seeing the fitness of the patient for surgery, for undergoing surgery anesthesia. Now we come to the surgery itself. Now I would ask that when we are subjecting a patient to surgery, what are we doing? We are strengthening the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. The posterior wall of the canal is this area of the fascia transversalis. We want to strengthen this area. Now, first step of your hernia surgery is what is called as herniotomy. When you say otomy, it means opening. Herniotomy means opening of the hernia. When you add an ectomy, that means excision. So first thing, what is done is that we make, as I told you about, first is we make an incision on the skin and we identify the aponeurosis external oblique, and we identify the superficial ring. Then we open the inguinal canal. When we open the inguinal canal, we see these cord structures, and along with the cord structure, you would also see the hernial sac. So first thing you do is separate the hernial sac from the cord structures. Once you separated the hernial sac from the cord structures, the contents of the hernial sac are pushed back into the abdominal cavity, and the sac is ligated at its neck at the deep ring, or if it is a direct hernia, then we just push the contents back and we close that defect, or what sometimes we do is make a pursing of over the Hasselbalch's triangle. And then in the indirect hernia, the excess of the sac which lies outside over here is excised. Now, once this is done, step 2 of the operation begins, strengthening of this posterior wall. Now, classically, there are 2 methods of strengthening the posterior wall. One is called a herniorrhaphy. The second is called a hernioplasty. Now, what I say, simple way to remember, when you say plasty or plastic, that is, you're using a synthetic material, plastic-like material, which is a mesh, a polypropylene mesh. And rhaphy means you're using the structures, the native structures, the structures already present over here for strengthening the posterior wall. Now, the most popular surgery earlier, which we also learned as surgical residents, and till the early 2000, that was the surgery I was doing, was herniorrhaphy. And the herniorrhaphy I did, or we did, was Bassini's repair. Bassini, Bassini's repair. Bassini's repair Bassini's repair consisted of suturing the upturned portion where is the pointer? Yes. This was the conjoint tendon. As I told you, conjoint tendon began as the anterior wall. It extends like this all, then arched over the cord structures, then went posterior to the cord structure, inserted in the pubic tubercle. So what was done is a stitch was taken through the conjoint tendon and through the inguinal ligament. Now what happened is that the conjoint tendon would then go and occupy the posterior wall area. When you stitch this, the conjoint tendon to the upturned portion of inguinal ligament, the conjoint tendon would occupy the posterior wall, and thereby strengthen the posterior wall. Now the conjoint tendon now lies, rather than arching over the cord structures, it lies behind the cord structures and forms the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. So this was Bassini's repair. Then we have the hernioplasty. Hernioplasty is very simple. You take a mesh and place it over here over the posterior wall. Make an opening in the mesh to allow the cord structures to come out, which is now a new deep ring, and you suture the mesh into place. The inferior border of the mesh will lie over the inguinal ligament, and it will lie over the fascia transversalis. On top of the mesh will then lie the cord structures. The mesh would later on become incorporated with the fascia transversalis and form a strong boundary, preventing the formation of hernia. Right? So that is called a hernioplasty. Now, if these are, of course, there are a whole lot of different herniorrhaphies and hernioplasties. But at your level, if you remember Bassini's repair, and the type of hernioplasty I've described is called Lichtenstein's repair. So if you remember these two, that would be more than sufficient. Now, next would be that the more advanced methods of repairing the hernia, that is the laparoscopic methods. Now, in laparoscopic methods, over here, what we are doing is, as described earlier, we are making an incision over the skin. We are making an incision first over the skin, opening the inguinal canal. Then we see the cord structures. We lift the cord structures separate, and then we see the posterior wall. So posterior wall lies the deepest. Now, rather than going through the skin, etc., why don't we come through the abdomen? So that is what is done in most of the laparoscopic repairs. We come, rather than we make a cut in the umbilicus, introduce a port and then a telescope, and through this we visualize the hernia from inside. Then what we do, what we seeing groups of bowel going out through the hernial opening, which may be either indirect or direct. We pull out these contents, pull them back into the peritoneal cavity, and then the defect or the opening is repaired by placing a mesh. Now, normally this mesh is not placed directly in the peritoneal cavity, but what is done is there are two methods. One is called TAP, T-A-P-P, Transabdominal Preperitoneal Repair, TAP, in which we dissect the peritoneum of the anterior abdominal wall in the region of the inguinal ligament, and we place a mesh over this. We place a mesh over this region, and then we suture the peritoneum back. So now the mesh lies deep to the fascia transversalis, but superficial to the peritoneum over here. Right. There's another method of doing it, which is called TEP. That is total extraperitoneal repair. Now, in the TAP, what we did was we went into the abdominal cavity. But in TEP, we don't go through the abdominal cavity. We will start dissecting the peritoneum from the umbilicus down here. So we will create a space between the anterior abdominal wall and the peritoneum and reach this region. Then we again do the same thing, pull the contents in, and we place a mesh over here. So those are the laparoscopic methods of. So this should be summarize it all. Now, anybody has got any questions, I would encourage everybody to ask any questions they want. Any questions, please? You can unmute your mic and ask the questions, or you could type. Any questions? No questions? Okay. Triangle of doom and significance in thoracic surgery or in laparoscopic surgery. Richa Verma, yes, what is your question? Okay, 1 minute now. Let me read all the questions and I'll answer them one by one. Okay, now somebody asked about the triangle of doom. Now, triangle of doom lies when you're doing a laparoscopic surgery. You have to remember, in open surgery, you're not encountering any major structures. But in a laparoscopic surgery, you are encountering the external iliac vessels, which are entering into the femoral canal and ultimately forming the femoral artery. Now there is a triangle area when you're dissecting out over there. There's a triangle area which is formed medially by the the vas deferens, and laterally it is formed by the formed by the inferior epigastric vessels. And that triangle, within that triangle lies the iliac vessels. So they say when you're dissecting within this triangle, you have to be very careful about injuring these vessels. So that if you injure it, then you are in for trouble. Any other questions? Now somebody has asked difference between Bassinis and modified Bassinis. Now, what I described is modified Bassinis. The classical Bassinis, nobody really does right now. The classical Bassinis only does right now, but in the classical Bassinis, what was done is the cut was made right up to even the fascia transversalis was opened up, and then the entire bulk along the conjoint tendon, the fascia transversalis, was sutured to the upturned portion of inguinal ligament. So that was the classical Bassinis. But what I've described is the modified Bassinis. Okay. Now, somebody said we can see you if you want to see the paper illustration which I made over here. I don't know. I don't know whether you can see me, but here it is. I was trying. This is the testes, and this I was showing you the finger which is going and causing and folding the scrotal skin going. Then it goes up into the inguinal canal, and then the finger is placed like this in the inguinal canal, and you feel the impulse at the tip or at the pulp, right? Then, any other questions? Anybody has any other questions? Anybody has any questions? So rolling and sliding hernia are the same. That's a good question. As far as I know, I'm not, very frankly, at this time, I'm not very sure what a rolling hernia is. But as far as I know, that both should be interchangeable terms. I can confirm that later on to your group. But as far as I know, I think they are the same. But the terminology sliding hernia is more commonly used. Anybody else? Any other questions? Can direct and indirect hernia occur at the same time? Very good question. Yes, this is called a pantaloon hernia. Pantaloon hernia means the word pant comes from the word pantaloon. Earlier days, the men used to wear what is called pantaloons, or what was patloon in Hindi. It was corrupted to patloon. And the hernia, in a pantaloon hernia, you have a direct and an indirect slide, indirect sac, and it straddles on the inferior epigastric vessel. So, in other words, now let me show you with the let me change to the share screen version. The going back to my illustration over here. So I mentioned this is the inferior. So in a pantaloon type hernia, you would have one sac which comes out over here like this, and the pant, this what is called this crotch of the pant would come over the epigastric, and then you would have another sac over here. Now, pantaloon hernia is one of the causes of recurrence of hernia. Like, for example, you have a patient with a pantaloon hernia, one sac over here, one sac over here, and the sac is communicating, but it straddles over here. Now, this is what is called the crotch area, what you can call the crotch area of your pant, and these are the two legs of the pant, one over here, one over here. And this is where it straddles out, and this is supposed to be one of the causes of recurrence, that you operate a patient with hernia and you see the indirect component and you think that you have solution, you've done the hernial repair, but then you have left behind the direct component. So then you have a recurrence. Any other questions? Why is hernia more common on right sides? Good question. I mean, there are certain things which you don't have the answer to. That whether, I don't think there is any answer given that any particular reason why the right side should be more common. Maybe because most of us are dominant we are right dominant, so therefore if you notice your hand also, if you're right-sided, the right hand will also be more developed. So maybe there's more pressure coming on the right side. But why it's more common on the right side, I have not come across in literature any particular reasons stating why it is more common. Okay, then, if there is no other questions, then I would conclude today's session. Thank you for bearing up with me, and you can give me your feedback regarding this class. Right. Thank you, everybody. So I will end the